The scar tissue pulled tight every time Grazza tried to smile, turning what should have been an expression of joy into a twisted grimace that sent children running and made grown warriors look away. She touched the ruined left side of her face as she stood alone in the forest clearing, fingers tracing the ridges and valleys where the ritual flame had burned away not just her flesh but her future, her hope, and every dream she had dared to harbor about finding someone who might love her. The proving had been meant to test her courage, to mark her transition from girl to warrior in the eyes of her clan. Every orc underwent it on their 18th winter, holding their face over sacred flames while the shamans chanted and the drums thundered. Most emerged with a small mark on their cheek or brow, a badge of honor that proved they could withstand pain. But the rotten wooden platform had collapsed beneath Grazza, pitching her face first into the ceremonial fire pit. By the time they pulled her out, screaming and thrashing, half her face had melted like wax. That had been 3 years ago, and in those 3 years, Grazza had learned to read the language of disgust in every pair of eyes that fell upon her. Her own mother could barely look at her. The young warriors who had once competed for her attention now found urgent business elsewhere when she approached. Even the clan children, who had never known her before the scarring, seemed to sense that she was something to be pitied or feared, so she had left. Taken her hunting gear, her small collection of possessions, and walked away from the only home she had ever known. Better to be alone in the wilderness than to be a living ghost among her own people. A cautionary tale whispered around fires when young orcs needed reminding about the dangers of pride or carelessness, or whatever lesson the elders had decided her suffering represented. Now she lived in a small cave on the border between orc territory and human lands, hunting and fishing and trying not to think too much about the long, empty years stretching ahead of her. Sometimes she went days without speaking aloud, her voice growing rusty from disuse. She had become very good at being alone, at finding the small pleasures in solitude a successful hunt, a clear stream to bathe in, the way moonlight filtered through pine branches on cloudless nights. But loneliness had weight. It pressed down on her chest as she lay in her cave at night, making each breath feel like work. It whispered cruel truths in the spaces between heartbeats. No one will ever want you. You are broken. You are ugly. You will die alone. Grazza was contemplating these cheerful thoughts as she tracked a wounded deer through the early autumn forest, following the blood trail with practiced efficiency. The animal had taken an arrow human-made, she noted, examining the fletching on a shaft that had broken off against a tree trunk. Someone was hunting in this area, probably from one of the scattered human homesteads that dotted the borderlands. She would need to be careful. Humans had even less reason to look at her kindly than her own kind did. The blood trail led her to a small clearing where the deer had finally collapsed. But someone had reached it first. A human man crouched beside the fallen animal, a knife in his hand, clearly preparing to field dress his kill. He looked young, perhaps mid-20s, with dark hair that fell into his eyes and the lean, weather-worn build of someone who worked outdoors. He wore simple homespun clothing and well-worn boots, and something about the careful, respectful way he approached the dead deer suggested he was no stranger to hunting. Grazza froze at the tree line, knowing she should retreat before he saw her. Nothing good came from encounters between her kind and his, but something made her pause, perhaps simple curiosity about another living soul, or perhaps the small, traitorous part of her heart that still craved connection, despite everything experience had taught her. The decision was taken from her hands when a branch cracked under her foot. The man spun around, knife raised defensively, and his eyes went wide when he saw her. Grazza watched the familiar sequence play out on his face surprise, recognition of what she was, and then the inevitable recoil of disgust when his gaze locked onto her scarred face. But he did not run, did not scream or curse or reach for a weapon. He simply stood there, knife lowered, breathing hard, staring at her with an expression she could not quite read. "I tracked it first," Grazza heard herself say, her voice harsh from disuse and defensive pride. "The deer is mine by right." The man blinked, seeming to shake himself out of whatever trance had gripped him. "You shot it?" "No, but I tracked it. I have been following the blood trail for over a mile." He looked down at the deer, then back at her, and something in his face shifted. "Fair enough. But I shot it and I need the meat. My family's stores are low and winter is coming." He paused, then added almost reluctantly, "I could share it. Half for you, half for me. Seems fair since we both had a hand in bringing it down." Grazza stared at him, certain she had misheard. Humans did not bargain with orcs. They did not offer to share their kills or speak in reasonable tones about fairness and rights. They killed or drove away, and if they were particularly cruel, they did both. "Why?" The word came out more sharply than she intended. "Why what?" "Why would you share with me? I am orc. You are human. Your kind and mine do not exactly have a history of friendly cooperation." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "True enough. But you have not tried to kill me and take the whole deer, which I appreciate. And you are right that you tracked it first. My father always taught me to respect other hunters." He gestured at the deer with his knife. "Besides, there is enough meat here for both of us. No point in fighting over it when we can both walk away with full packs." It was, Grazza had to admit, a reasonable argument, more reasonable than she had any right to expect from a human. She found herself stepping into the clearing, watching him carefully for any sign of treachery. Up close, she could see he had gray eyes that reminded her of winter skies, and a long scar on his forearm that spoke of some past injury. He was taller than her most humans were, but not by much, and there was a steadiness to him that she found oddly reassuring. "I am Grazza," she said, because it seemed important to establish that she was a person, not just an orc. "Kellan," he replied. "Kellan Jorvik. I have a homestead about 2 miles west of here." He hesitated, then added, "I have seen signs of someone living in these woods." "Cave dweller," I guessed, "from the smoke I sometimes see rising from the ridge." "That you?" She nodded warily. "Thought so. You are a good hunter. I find your snares sometimes, always well placed and carefully set." He turned back to the deer, kneeling beside it. "If you want to help with the butchering, we can split the work and be done faster. Otherwise, you are welcome to wait while I do it." Grazza found herself kneeling across from him, drawing her own knife. "I can help." They worked in silence for a while, their hands moving with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this many times before. Kellan was skilled. She noted his cuts were clean and precise, wasting nothing. He treated the animal with respect, murmuring a quiet thank you to its spirit as he worked. "That scar," he said after a while, not looking up from his work. "It looks like a burn, must have hurt like hell." Grazza's hand stilled on the knife. Every muscle in her body tensed, waiting for the cruel joke or the pitying comment or the disgusted recoil she had learned to expect. But Kellan just kept working, his tone conversational rather than mocking. "I got my arm scar from hot oil," he continued, nodding at his forearm. "Stupid accident when I was 17, knocked over a lamp and tried to catch it. Hurt so bad I passed out. Cannot imagine having a burn that extensive." He finally looked up at her, his gray eyes steady and clear. "Must have taken real strength to survive something like that." Something in Grazza's chest cracked open, a painful, unexpected thaw in ice she had thought was frozen solid. No one had ever responded to her scar like that, with matter-of-fact acknowledgement rather than horror or pity. As if it were just another injury, just another story, rather than the defining tragedy of her existence. It was a ritual fire, she found herself saying. Part of my clan's coming-of-age ceremony. Things went wrong. Kellan nodded, accepting this without comment, and they returned to their work. By the time they had finished butchering the deer and dividing the meat into 2 even portions, the sun had begun its descent toward the horizon. "Will you be all right getting back to your cave before dark?" Kellan asked as he secured his share of the meat in his pack. "I know these woods well." "I will be fine," he nodded, then hesitated, clearly wrestling with something. "Look," he said finally, "I hunt these woods regular, and it seems we are likely to cross paths again. So I am going to say this plain, I have no quarrel with you. You seem like a decent sort, orc or not. If you need anything, trade goods, supplies, whatever, my homestead is the one with the split rail fence and the big oak tree out front. About 2 miles due west of here, like I said." Grazza stared at him, trying to understand the strange human who spoke to her like a person, who offered help without expecting anything in return. "Why are you being kind to me?" Kellan shouldered his pack and gave her a small smile. "Because you did not take the whole deer when you could have. Because you are out here surviving on your own, which takes grit. And because my mother raised me to judge people by their actions, not by what they look like or where they come from." He touched 2 fingers to his forehead in a casual salute. "Stay safe out here, Grazza." Then he was gone, disappearing into the trees with the easy stride of someone who knew the forest well. Grazza stood alone in the darkening clearing, her portion of meat secured in her pack, and felt something she had not felt in 3 long years. Hope. Small and fragile as a bird's egg, but real nonetheless. The next time she saw Kellan was 2 weeks later, when she found him trapped beneath a fallen tree. Grazza had been checking her snare lines when she heard the shout, followed by a thunderous crash and then ominous silence. She ran toward the sound, every hunter's instinct screaming that someone was in trouble. She found him pinned from the waist down beneath a massive pine that had been dead long enough to become unstable. He must have been cutting firewood nearby. His axe lay a few feet away, and several neatly split logs were stacked beside a small handcart. "Kellan." She dropped to her knees beside him, assessing the situation quickly. The tree was huge, far too heavy for one person to lift, but she could see that most of its weight was resting on the ground rather than on Kellan's legs. Still, he was thoroughly pinned and his face had gone pale with pain. "Grazza," he blinked at her, clearly surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I heard you shout. Can you feel your legs?" "Yes. Hurts like hell, but I can feel them. I do not think anything is broken, but I cannot get free." She examined the tree carefully, her mind working through the problem. "I am going to use this log as a lever," she said, grabbing one of the pieces he had already split. "When I lift, you need to drag yourself out as fast as you can. Understand?" He nodded, his jaw tight with pain and determination. Grazza positioned the log carefully, then threw all her considerable strength against it. For a moment nothing happened and she thought it might be impossible. But then the tree shifted, rising just enough to create a gap, and Kellan was dragging himself backward with desperate speed. "Clear." He gasped, and Grazza let the tree drop back into place, her muscles screaming with effort. She turned to find Kellan sitting on the ground, breathing hard, his hands shaking with adrenaline. His legs were badly bruised and scraped, but he had been right, nothing seemed to be broken. "Thank you," he said when he could speak again. "If you had not come along, I would have been stuck there until nightfall, maybe longer. Can you walk?" He tested his legs carefully, wincing. "I think so. It will hurt, but I can manage. Let me help you." She offered her hand without thinking, then froze, suddenly aware of what she was doing. but Kellan took her hand without hesitation, letting her pull him to his feet. He swayed slightly, one hand going to her shoulder for balance, and they stood like that for a moment close enough that she could smell the wood smoke and pine sap on his clothes, close enough to see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes. "Your homestead is 2 miles from here," Grazza said, her voice rougher than usual. "You will never make it on your own, not with those legs. Let me help you." "You do not have to. I know I do not have to. I am offering." Something in his expression softened. "Then I accept, thank you." It took them nearly 2 hours to make the journey, Kellan leaning heavily on her shoulder, both of them stopping frequently so he could rest. By the time they finally emerged from the tree line, and she saw the homestead he had described, split rail fence, big oak tree, a neat cabin with a barn and several outbuildings, full darkness had fallen and Kellan was barely able to keep his feet. "There is a guest room," he said as they approached the cabin. "Around back, separate entrance. It is not much, just a place where my hired hands sleep during harvest season, but it has a bed and a stove. You should stay the night. It is too dark to go back to your cave now, and you must be exhausted." Grazza wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain the distance and safety that solitude provided, but her muscles ached, and the thought of the long walk back through the dark forest was genuinely unappealing. "All right," she heard herself say. "Just for tonight." Kellan's face broke into a relieved smile. "Good. Let me get you some blankets and supplies, the least I can do after you saved my life." The guest room turned out to be a small but comfortable space with a proper bed, a wood stove, and even a wash basin. Kellan brought her an armload of blankets, a jug of water, some bread and cheese, and a jar of salve for her aching muscles. "For pulling that tree," he explained when she looked at the salve questioningly. "My mother's recipe works wonders on sore muscles and bruises." "Thank you," Grazza said, feeling awkward and uncertain in the face of such casual generosity. Kellan lingered in the doorway for a moment, looking like he wanted to say something else. Finally, he just nodded and said, "Good night, Grazza, and thank you again. I owe you one." After he left, Grazza sat on the edge of the bed, a real bed, something she had not slept in since leaving her clan, and tried to process everything that had happened. She had saved a human's life. That same human had offered her shelter and food without a moment's hesitation. And at no point had he treated her like a monster or a curiosity. He had simply treated her like a person. It was, she thought as she finally lay down to sleep, the strangest and most wonderful day she had had in 3 years. When Grazza woke the next morning, she found a basket outside her door containing fresh eggs, more bread, a wedge of butter, and a small pot of honey. She stared at it for a long moment, then carried it back inside and made herself the best breakfast she had eaten in recent memory. Kellan was outside chopping wood slowly and carefully, favoring his bruised legs when she finally emerged. He looked up as she approached, his face breaking into a smile that did something strange to her heartbeat. "Morning," he called. "Hope you slept well." "I did, thank you for the food." "Least I could do." He set down his axe and gestured at his legs. "I am moving like an old man today, but nothing feels broken or seriously damaged. You saved me from a lot worse than bruises." Grazza nodded, suddenly uncertain about what to say or do. The rules for this situation had not been covered in her limited experience with human interaction. "I should go," she said finally, "back to my cave." "Of course. But before you do," he disappeared into the cabin and emerged a moment later with a cloth-wrapped bundle. "Some supplies. Flour, salt, a bit of sugar. I know living out in the wild makes it hard to get things like this." She almost refused on principle. But the truth was that he was right. She had been living on meat, fish, and whatever she could forage, and the thought of having flour to make bread or salt to properly preserve food was genuinely tempting. "Thank you," she said, taking the bundle. Then, because it felt important to make this clear, "If you need help again with work around the homestead or anything else, I will come, to repay the debt." Kellan tilted his head, considering this. "Not a debt, but if you are offering, I could use help with the harvest next month. My usual hired hands found work elsewhere this year, and I am worried about getting everything done before the first frost. I can pay you in supplies, trade goods, whatever you need." It was a sensible arrangement, practical, mutually beneficial. And it meant she would see him again, which sent a small thrill through her that she tried very hard to ignore. "Agreed," she said. "Send word when you need me." "I will. And Grazza," he met her eyes, his expression serious, "you are welcome here any time, even if there is no work to be done." "I mean that." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and turned toward the forest before he could see the confusion and hope warring in her expression. Over the next month, Grazza found herself at Kellan's homestead with increasing frequency. At first she told herself it was simply practical. He needed help with the harvest, and she needed the supplies he paid her with. But the truth was harder to ignore with each passing day. She liked being around him. Kellan was easy to work with, competent and hardworking without being demanding. He sang while he worked, old ballads and folk songs that made the labor pass more quickly. He told stories about growing up on the homestead, about his parents who had passed away several years ago, about the challenges of working the land alone. And he listened when she talked, which was perhaps the most surprising thing of all. Grazza found herself telling him about her life before the scarring, about growing up in the clan, about the skills she had learned and the dreams she had held. She even told him, haltingly, about the night of the ritual and the long, painful recovery that had followed. Kellan listened to all of it without interrupting, without offering empty platitudes or false reassurances. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, then said simply, "That must have been terrifying. I am sorry you went through that. Not, I am sorry that happened to you," which implied distance and sympathy. But I am sorry you went through that, which acknowledged her experience and her strength in surviving it. Grazza had to turn away to hide the tears that suddenly blurred her vision. They worked side by side through the harvest season, bringing in wheat and vegetables and preparing the homestead for winter. Kellan taught her about crop rotation and soil management, about preserving food and maintaining tools. Grazza taught him advanced tracking techniques and showed him how to set snares that were nearly invisible. They fell into an easy rhythm, a comfortable partnership that felt as natural as breathing. And slowly, so slowly that Grazza almost did not notice it happening, the walls she had built around her heart began to crumble. She caught herself watching him when he did not know she was looking, admiring the efficient way he moved, the strength in his hands, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. She found excuses to stand close to him, to brush against him accidentally, to feel the warmth of his presence. And sometimes, though she told herself she was imagining it, she thought she caught him watching her the same way. The first frost came in late October, arriving overnight and coating everything in a delicate layer of white. Grazza woke in the guest room where she had been staying more often than not, and found Kellan already up and preparing breakfast in the main cabin. "Morning," he said cheerfully, gesturing at the table where he had laid out plates and food. "Figured we deserved a real breakfast after getting the last of the harvest in yesterday." They ate together in comfortable silence, and Grazza realized with a start that this felt like home in a way her cave never had, in a way even her clan's village had stopped feeling after the scarring. "I should probably head back to my cave," she said reluctantly when they had finished eating. Make sure everything is secure for winter. Kellan set down his mug of tea and met her eyes across the table. Or you could stay. Grazza's heart stuttered. Stay, here, at the homestead. Winter is hard out in the wild, and you have been staying in the guest room half the time anyway. You could make it your permanent residence. Keep helping me with the work. Gods know there is always something that needs doing, and I will make sure you have food, warmth, and anything else you need. It was, objectively, a sensible offer. Winters were brutal in the borderlands, and surviving alone in a cave would be difficult and dangerous. But Grazza could hear the unspoken question beneath the practical words. Stay because I want you here. Stay because I have gotten used to your company. Stay because the homestead feels empty when you are gone. What about other humans? She asked quietly. Someone will see me eventually, they will talk, they might cause trouble for you. Kellan shrugged. Let them talk. This is my land and you are my guest. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. You would face prejudice from your own people, for harboring an orc. Probably. But I faced prejudice when I chose to stay here and work the land instead of joining the army like my father wanted. I faced prejudice when I refused to participate in the local militia's raids into orc territory. People always find something to judge you for. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. I am asking you to stay because I want you here, Grazza. Because you are the best hunting partner I have ever had. Because you work harder than 3 men. And because I have not enjoyed someone's company this much in longer than I can remember. What other people think about it is their problem, not mine. Grazza felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to leap into unknown waters. Every instinct screamed that this was dangerous, that she was setting herself up for inevitable heartbreak and disappointment. But the small, stubborn part of her that still believed in possibility was louder than her fear. All right, she said, I will stay. Kellan's face lit up with a smile so bright and genuine that it made her chest ache. Yeah? Yes, but I pull my weight. I am not a charity case. Believe me, I know. You work harder than anyone I have ever met. He stood and offered his hand across the table. Partners, Grazza took his hand, feeling the warm, callous strength of his grip. Partners. Winter settled over the borderlands like a heavy blanket, bringing snow and ice and long, dark nights. Grazza and Kellan fell into a domestic routine that felt both foreign and perfectly natural. They worked together during the day tending the animals, maintaining the buildings, hunting when the weather permitted. In the evenings they sat by the fire, reading or talking or simply enjoying the comfortable silence. Kellan was teaching her to read, spending patient hours with her as she struggled through the alphabet and then simple words. Grazza had never learned as a child literacy was not valued in the clans, where oral tradition carried all the important knowledge. But she found she enjoyed it, enjoyed the way words on a page could come alive and tell stories. She was teaching Kellan her clan's language in return, correcting his pronunciation and laughing at his attempts to get the guttural sounds right. He was a terrible student, all enthusiasm and no natural aptitude, but his efforts touched her more than she wanted to admit. They were careful around each other in those first months, maintaining a polite distance, never quite acknowledging the tension that crackled between them like static electricity before a storm. But it was there, undeniable and growing stronger with each passing day. Grazza would catch herself staring at his hands as he worked, imagining what they would feel like touching her. She would lie awake at night in her room, knowing he was just a short walk away in the main cabin, and ache with longing she could not name. And sometimes she would catch him looking at her with an expression that made her heart race, hungry and tender, and full of an emotion she was afraid to identify. The moment everything changed came in early February, during a blizzard that lasted 3 days. They were trapped inside together, the snow piling so high against the doors that venturing outside became genuinely dangerous. Grazza spent most of the first day pacing restlessly, unused to such enforced idleness. But by the second day, she had settled into the strange intimacy of being snowbound with Kellan. They played cards and board games. They cooked elaborate meals together just to pass the time. They told stories about their childhoods and argued amiably about everything from the best way to tan leather to whether summer or autumn was the superior season. On the third day, as the storm finally began to blow itself out, Kellan asked the question Grazza had been dreading. "Why did you really leave your clan?" They were sitting by the fire, mugs of hot tea in their hands, and Grazza felt her whole body tense at the question. "I told you, I was scarred. People could not look at me." "That is part of it, maybe. But I have seen you track prey through conditions that would defeat most hunters. I have watched you work through pain and exhaustion without complaint. You are tough, Grazza, tough enough to handle people staring." He set down his tea and turned to face her fully. "So what was the real reason?" Grazza stared into the fire, watching the flames dance and feeling the old wounds tear open. "I left because staying meant watching everyone I cared about look through me, like I was already dead, or maybe like I had never really existed at all. I left because the pity was worse than the disgust. I left because there was no future for me there. No warrior would want a scarred mate. No family would want me around their children. No elder would take me seriously." Her voice cracked. "I left because it hurt too much to stay in a place where I would always be broken, always be the tragedy people whispered about but never directly addressed." Kellan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said very gently, "You are not broken." "Yes, I am. Look at me." She gestured at her face, at the mass of scar tissue that twisted the left side into a permanent ruin. "I am hideous. Children cry when they see me. Warriors cannot meet my eyes. I am a monster wearing the shape of an orc." "No." Kellan's voice was firm now, almost angry. "You are a person who survived something terrible and came out the other side stronger. You are a skilled hunter, a hard worker, and the most genuinely good person I have met in years." He moved closer, and Grazza's breath caught as he reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and touched her scarred cheek with infinite gentleness. "This does not make you a monster," he said quietly, his thumb tracing one of the ridges of scar tissue. "This just means you have lived, you have suffered, you have survived, and I think," he paused, swallowed hard, and continued with obvious effort, "I think you are beautiful, not despite the scars, not in spite of them, just beautiful, period." Grazza could not breathe, could not think. His hand was warm against her ruined skin, and he was looking at her with such tenderness, such genuine caring, that it felt like her heart might break from the impossibility of it. "How can you say that?" she whispered. "How can you possibly mean that?" "Because it is true. Because I have spent the last 4 months getting to know you, and every day I find something new to admire. Your strength, your kindness, your terrible sense of humor, the way you sing while you work when you think no one is listening." His other hand came up to cup her other cheek, and he was holding her face like she was something precious. "I know I am just a human and you are orc, and there are about 1,000 reasons why this is complicated. But I need you to know that when I look at you, I do not see a monster. I see someone I care about. Someone he stopped, clearly struggling with the words. "Someone you what?" Grazza managed, her voice barely audible. "Someone I love," Kellan said, and the words fell into the space between them like stones into still water, sending ripples through everything. "I love you, Grazza. I think I have loved you since you hauled that tree off me, or maybe since you shared the deer meat, or possibly since the first moment you walked into that clearing looking fierce and beautiful and utterly alone. I know it is impossible. I know there is no precedent for this, no path forward that does not involve massive complications, but I cannot keep pretending I do not feel this way. Grazza felt tears spilling down her cheeks, good side and scarred side both, and did not bother to wipe them away. You cannot love me. I am orc. You are human. The world does not allow for this. Then the world can go to hell, Kellan said with surprising vehemence. I do not care what the world allows. I care about you. And if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, if there is any chance you might, she kissed him before he could finish the sentence, leaning forward and pressing her lips to his with all the desperate, terrified hope that had been building in her chest for months. Kellan made a surprised sound and then kissed her back, his hands sliding into her hair, pulling her closer. It was everything Grazza had dreamed about and nothing like she had imagined. It was awkward and perfect, tender and hungry, terrifying and right. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she pressed her forehead to his and felt his arms come around her, solid and sure. I love you too, she whispered. I have been trying not to. I have been telling myself it was impossible, that I should not hope for something I could never have. But I love you, Kellan. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you see me as a person rather than a creature. I love the way you sing while you work and the way you are patient with me when I am learning to read. I love everything about you and it terrifies me. I know. It terrifies me too. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his eyes bright with emotion. But I would rather be terrified and in love than safe and alone. Stay with me, Grazza, not just for the winter, stay. There will be consequences. When people find out, let there be consequences. We will face them together. Grazza thought about everything that could go wrong, all the ways this could end in disaster. But she also thought about the alternative, walking away, returning to her lonely cave, spending the rest of her life wondering what might have been. Yes, she said, and felt like she was stepping off a cliff into open air, trusting that she would fly rather than fall. Yes, I will stay. They spent the rest of the evening tangled together by the fire, talking and kissing and making plans for a future that had seemed impossible just hours before. When Grazza finally returned to her room, let us do this properly, Kellan had said with an endearing mix of shyness and determination. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She was in love with a human who loved her back, scars and all. It was impossible, improbable, and utterly real. For the first time in 3 years, Grazza allowed herself to hope for a future that included more than simple survival. Spring came slowly to the borderlands, the snow melting in fits and starts, revealing brown earth that gradually transformed into green as the first plants pushed their way toward the sun. Grazza and Kellan worked side by side preparing for the planting season, their partnership now deepened by the intimacy of acknowledged love. They were careful still, mindful of the boundaries they had set. Kellan had insisted on courting her properly, a concept that had initially baffled Grazza, but that she had come to appreciate. He left small gifts for her to find, wildflowers, interesting stones, a carved wooden comb. He asked her opinion on everything from crop rotation to repairs on the barn. He told her stories about his parents and his childhood, sharing the pieces of himself that mattered most. Grazza tried to reciprocate in kind, though the customs of courtship were different in orc culture. She hunted for him, bringing back the choicest cuts of meat. She made him a new shirt, stitching it carefully in the evenings by firelight. She taught him the orc songs her mother had sung to her as a child, the ones about love and loyalty and the bonds that could not be broken. They kissed often now by the fire, in the barn, in the brief moments between tasks when they found themselves alone and unable to resist the pull between them. Each kiss felt like a small miracle, a defiance of everything the world said was impossible. But as the weather warmed and travel became easier, they both knew it was only a matter of time before the outside world intruded on their private happiness. The intrusion came in April, in the form of 3 human men who rode up to the homestead one afternoon while Grazza and Kellan were repairing the split rail fence. Grazza saw them first and felt her whole body go tense. Kellan followed her gaze and his expression darkened. "I know these men," he said quietly. "They are from the settlement about 10 miles south, the one with the garrison." He squeezed her hand briefly. "Let me handle this." But Grazza could see the suspicion and disgust on the men's faces as they approached, their hands resting on the hilts of their weapons. She knew how this would play out. "Kellan Jorvik," the leader called out, a thick-built man with a graying beard and hostile eyes. "Heard some strange rumors about you. Thought we would ride up and see for ourselves." "Theodore," Kellan replied evenly, stepping forward to place himself between Grazza and the men. "What rumors would those be? Rumors that you are harboring an orc. Rumors that you have a greenskin living on your property, eating your food, sleeping under your roof." Theodore spat on the ground. "Rumors that you have gone soft in the head and forgotten which side you are on. The orc has a name. Her name is Grazza, and she is my guest and my business partner. She has been helping me with the homestead work." "Your business partner?" Theodore said it like a curse. "A man does not take an orc as a partner, Jorvik. A man kills orcs or drives them away. Those are the only 2 options." Grazza felt rage building in her chest, hot and fierce. She had known this would happen eventually, but the reality of it was worse than she had anticipated. These men looked at her and saw nothing but a monster, something to be destroyed or driven off. "Grazza has done nothing to harm anyone," Kellan said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "She is a skilled hunter and a hard worker. She saved my life last autumn when a tree fell on me. She has every right to be here." "No orc has rights on human land," one of the other men said. "That is the law. The law says that orcs cannot own property in the borderlands. It says nothing about working on property owned by humans." Theodore shook his head in disgust. "You are defending a monster, Jorvik. Your father would be ashamed." "My father taught me to judge people by their actions, not by their bloodlines. Grazza's actions have been nothing but honorable." "Honorable?" Theodore laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "An orc cannot be honorable. They are raiders and killers, every last one of them. And this one," he pointed at Grazza with open contempt, "this one is not even a whole orc. Look at that face. It is no wonder her own kind cast her out. They probably got tired of looking at something so hideous." Grazza flinched as if he had struck her. The words hit all her deepest fears, all the terrible truth she had tried to escape by leaving her clan. "You are hideous. You are unwanted. You are something to be cast out." But before she could respond, before she could retreat into the safety of silence and acceptance, Kellan moved. He crossed the distance between himself and Theodore in 3 long strides and punched the older man square in the jaw, sending him stumbling backward. "Say one more word about her," Kellan said in a voice that shook with fury, "and I will knock every tooth out of your head. I do not care if you have a problem with me. I do not care if you want to spread rumors or make trouble, but you will not stand on my property and insult the woman I love." The silence that followed was deafening. All 3 men stared at Kellan in shock. Grazza felt like the ground had opened up beneath her feet. "The woman you—" Theodore wiped blood from his lip, his expression morphing from shock to disgust. "You are lying with that creature. You have sunk to bedding an orc." "I have fallen in love with an orc," Kellan corrected, his voice steady despite the rage still evident in his stance. "And she is worth 10 of you on your best day. Now get off my land." "Jorvik, you are making a mistake. No. The mistake would be standing here and listening to you insult the person I care about most in this world. I said get off my land. Do not come back." Theodore and his companions exchanged glances, clearly uncertain how to proceed. Finally, Theodore mounted his horse and looked down at Kellan with something like pity. "You have made your choice. The settlement will hear about this. Do not expect help when you need it, and do not expect anyone to trade with you. You have chosen a monster over your own kind." "I have chosen love over hatred," Kellan replied. "And I would make the same choice every time." The men rode away, leaving Grazza and Kellan standing in the torn-up dirt beside the half-repaired fence. Grazza felt like she could not breathe, could not think past the enormity of what had just happened. "You told them," she said, her voice barely audible. "You told them you loved me." Kellan turned to face her, his hands shaking with residual adrenaline. "I am sorry. I know we agreed to keep things private to be careful, but I could not stand there and let him talk about you that way. I could not," he broke off, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I am not sorry I said it. I am sorry if I made things harder for you." Grazza crossed to him and took his still shaking hands in hers. "You defended me. You chose me over your own people's approval." "Of course I did. I love you." She kissed him then, hard and desperate, trying to pour everything she felt into the contact. When they broke apart, she pressed her forehead to his and said, "You know this means trouble, real trouble. The settlement will not let this go." "I know. But I meant what I said. I would choose you every time." He pulled back to look at her seriously. "But I need you to make a choice too. This is my fight to fight, but it affects you just as much. If you want to leave, to go back to living alone and avoid the consequences of what I just did, I will understand. I will not blame you." Grazza thought about her cave, about the safety of solitude, about the temptation to run from conflict as she had run from her clan. But she also thought about everything she had found here: partnership, purpose, love. She thought about Kellan standing between her and those men, fist clenched and voice shaking with protective rage. She thought about the future they had started to build together. "I am not going anywhere," she said firmly. "We face this together." The relief on Kellan's face was profound. "Together," he agreed. But even as they returned to their work, both of them knew that the easy part was over. Now they would have to fight for what they had found. The consequences came faster than either of them expected. Within a week, Kellan found a note nailed to his gate warning him that he was no longer welcome in the settlement. The local traders, who usually bought his produce, sent messages saying they would no longer do business with him. Someone, and they never discovered, who scattered broken glass in the pasture where his cow grazed, forcing Kellan to spend an entire day carefully clearing the area before the animal could hurt herself. Grazza wanted to hunt down whoever was responsible and make them pay for their cowardice. But Kellan counseled patience, arguing that violence would only confirm the prejudices people held about orcs. "We have to be smarter than them," he said one evening as they sat by the fire, going over their dwindling supplies. "We have to prove that we can live our lives without causing harm, without giving them ammunition for their hatred." "And what happens when they decide words and notes are not enough?" Grazza demanded. "What happens when they come with torches and weapons? Then we defend ourselves." "But not before. We do not start the fight." Grazza hated the logic of it, but she could not deny he was right. They had to maintain the moral high ground, even when it felt like that ground was crumbling beneath their feet. Help came from an unexpected source in early May. A woman appeared at the homestead one morning, riding a sturdy mare and leading a pack mule laden with supplies. She was perhaps 40 years old, with iron-gray hair braided back from her face and the weather-worn skin of someone who spent her life outdoors. Kellan. She called as she dismounted. Kellan approached cautiously, Grazza a step behind him. "That is me. Who are you?" "Name is Ruth Swanson. I have a homestead about 20 miles north of here. I heard what happened with Theodore and his boys." She looked past Kellan to Grazza, her expression curious but not hostile. "Also heard you have taken up with an orc woman. Wanted to see for myself if the rumors were true." "They are true," Kellan said evenly. "And if you have come here to cause trouble, no." Ruth smiled, a warm expression that transformed her weathered face. "I came to offer support, maybe even friendship if you are open to it." Kellan blinked in surprise. "Support? I know what it is like to be cast out for loving the wrong person. My late husband was from the southern continent. We faced years of prejudice and harassment before people finally accepted us." She gestured at the supplies on her mule. "Figured you could use some goods, since the settlement traders have cut you off. And I wanted you to know that not everyone in the borderlands is a narrow-minded fool." Grazza felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. "Why would you help us?" Ruth met her eyes directly without flinching or looking away. "Because love is rare enough in this hard world. When you find it, you should hold on tight, regardless of what form it takes." She held out her hand. "I am Ruth, pleased to meet you, Grazza." She took the offered hand, feeling the calluses and strength in Ruth's grip. "Now then," Ruth said briskly, "let us get these supplies unloaded, and you can tell me everything that has been happening. If Theodore and his cronies are making trouble, we should figure out how to handle it before things escalate." Over the next several hours, Ruth proved to be a wealth of practical advice and genuine support. She had experience navigating the social complexities of the borderlands, and she offered strategies for dealing with everything from trade embargoes to potential violence. "The key is to build alliances," she explained as they shared a midday meal. "There are more people like me out here than you might think, folks who do not give a damn about your bloodlines or who you love. We are spread out and we do not always know each other exists, but we are here. You just have to find us." "How do we do that?" Kellan asked. "Word of mouth, mostly. I will spread the word that you are good people who deserve support. Others will do the same. It will take time, but you will find your community." Grazza listened to this conversation with a mixture of hope and skepticism. She wanted to believe that such a community existed, but years of rejection had made her cautious about trusting in human goodness. As if reading her thoughts, Ruth turned to her and said gently, "I know you have been hurt. I can see it in your eyes, and not just from whatever caused those scars. But there are good people in this world, Grazza. People who will see you as you are, not as a collection of prejudices and assumptions. You have already found one in Kellan. Trust that there are others." "I am trying," Grazza said quietly. "That is all any of us can do." Ruth stayed for 2 days, helping with work around the homestead and offering the kind of practical companionship that Grazza had not realized she was starving for. When she finally left, she promised to return with more supplies and news within a month. "You are not alone in this," she said as she mounted her mare. "Remember that." After Ruth left, Grazza and Kellan sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over the fields. "I was starting to think we were going to face this completely alone," Kellan admitted. "Me too." Grazza leaned against him, taking comfort in his solid warmth. "But Ruth is right. We have to believe there are others like her. Otherwise, what is the point?" "The point is us," Kellan said, turning to face her. "Even if the whole world turned against us, it would still be worth it for what we have." Grazza kissed him softly, tasting the truth in his words. "I love you. I love you too, and we are going to make this work. I promise." She wanted to believe him, And slowly, day by day, she found that she did. True to her word, Ruth returned a month later with not just supplies but introductions. She brought with her a mixed-race couple from the eastern borderlands and a human man whose brother had married an orc woman from the northern clans. "I told you there were others," Ruth said with satisfaction as she made the introductions. "Meet your community." Over the course of that summer, Grazza and Kellan slowly built a network of support. It was not large, perhaps a dozen households spread across hundreds of miles, but it was real. These were people who understood what they were facing, who offered practical help and emotional support without judgment. The settlement continued to shun them, and there were occasional acts of harassment, vandalism, threatening notes, pointed insults when they ventured into shared territory. But they endured, drawing strength from each other and from their growing circle of allies. Grazza discovered talents she had not known she possessed. She became an advocate for others in mixed relationships, offering advice and support based on her own experiences. She helped Kellan diversify his income streams, teaching him advanced hunting and trapping techniques that let them trade in furs and preserved game rather than relying solely on crops. And gradually, painfully, she learned to see herself through Kellan's eyes rather than through the lens of her own trauma. When he called her beautiful, she started to believe him not because the scars had faded or because she had changed, but because she had learned that beauty was not just about physical appearance. It was about strength and kindness, and the courage to keep hoping when hope seemed impossible. The turning point came in late autumn, nearly a year after that first encounter in the forest clearing. Kellan had gone into the settlement against Grazza's advice, needing to purchase seed for the next year's planting that could not be obtained through their usual network of supporters. He had promised to be careful, to get in and out as quickly as possible. But he did not return when expected. As the afternoon stretched into evening and then into darkness, Grazza's worry transformed into genuine fear. She wanted to go after him immediately, but Ruth, who had been visiting at the time, counseled caution. "If you go charging in there, you will only confirm their worst fears about orcs," Ruth argued. "Give him until morning. If he is not back by first light, we will go together." Grazza paced through the night, unable to rest, imagining every terrible possibility. Had they arrested him? Hurt him? Were they holding him hostage to draw her out? At first light, when Kellan still had not returned, Grazza and Ruth saddled horses and rode for the settlement. They found him locked in the small garrison jail, sporting a black eye and split lip, but otherwise unharmed. The captain of the guard, a different man than Theodore, but no more sympathetic, claimed that Kellan had started a fight in the market. "That is a lie," Kellan said when Grazza demanded to know what had happened. "They attacked me when I tried to buy seed, said I was not welcome in the settlement anymore, that my money was tainted by orc influence. When I tried to leave, they jumped me and then arrested me for disturbing the peace." Grazza felt rage boiling in her veins, hot and fierce. Every instinct screamed at her to break down the cell door and free Kellan by force. But she could see the trap clearly. They wanted her to lose control, to confirm every prejudice about violent, savage orcs. So instead she turned to the captain and said with icy calm, "What is the bail?" The captain looked surprised, as if he had not expected her to understand the concept. 50 silver pieces. It was an enormous sum, clearly intended to be unpayable. But Ruth stepped forward and counted out the coins without hesitation. "There, release him." The captain looked frustrated but had no legal grounds to refuse. Within minutes, Kellan was free, leaning on Grazza as they walked out of the garrison. "I am sorry," he said once they were safely away from the settlement. "I should have listened to you. I should not have gone. You are alive and safe. That is what matters." But Grazza's mind was already racing ahead, considering their options. We cannot keep living like this. Always looking over our shoulders, always waiting for the next attack. I know. But what choice do we have? The answer came to Grazza suddenly, fully formed and surprisingly clear. We stop hiding. We stop letting them control the narrative. We show people that what we have is real and worth defending. How? She turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. By getting married, publicly, officially. By declaring to the whole borderland that we are committed to each other for life, and daring anyone to say we do not have that right. Kellan's eyes went wide. Grazza, that would put a target on both our backs. It would make everything so much harder. It is already hard. But right now we are living in the shadows, letting their prejudice dictate how we love each other. I am tired of hiding. I want to stand up and say this is real, this is valid, and anyone who has a problem with it can go to hell. She squeezed his hands. I want to marry you, Kellan. If you will have me. For a long moment he just stared at her. Then his face broke into a smile so bright it was like watching the sun rise. Yes, he said, pulling her into his arms. Yes, I will marry you. I will marry you in front of the whole damn world if that is what it takes to prove I am yours. They kissed then, heedless of Ruth's presence or the fact that they were still within sight of the settlement. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kellan rested his forehead against hers. When? Soon. Before winter, we will invite everyone we know, all our allies, everyone in our community. We will make it a celebration, a declaration. We will show them that love is stronger than hate. It will be dangerous. Everything about us is dangerous. At least this way we are taking control of the danger. Ruth, who had been watching this exchange with obvious amusement, cleared her throat. If you are quite finished being dramatic, I know an elder who performs marriage ceremonies for mixed couples. She is about 3 days' ride from here. I can send word if you like. Grazza and Kellan looked at each other and then back at Ruth. Yes, they said in unison. Please, Kellan added, and thank you, Ruth, for everything. Ruth waved away his gratitude. Thank me by being happy, that is all the payment I need. The next month was a flurry of preparation. Word spread through their network about the upcoming marriage, and offers of help poured in. Ruth coordinated everything, acting as unofficial wedding planner with an efficiency that was both impressive and slightly terrifying. The ceremony would be held at Kellan's homestead, in the clearing behind the barn where Grazza had spent so many hours working beside him. They would invite everyone in their community, perhaps 30 people in total, for a day of celebration and defiance. Grazza found herself both excited and terrified. The practical preparations kept her busy enough that she did not have too much time to think about the enormity of what they were doing. But in the quiet moments before sleep, she would lie awake and marvel at how much her life had changed. A year ago she had been alone, convinced she would die alone, certain that no one would ever look at her with anything but disgust or pity. Now she was planning a wedding to a man who loved her scars and all, who had stood up to his own people to defend her honor, who made her believe that happiness was something she deserved. It felt like a miracle. It felt like coming home. Kellan was similarly overwhelmed, but in the best possible way. He spent his evenings writing his vows, reading them aloud to Grazza and adjusting them based on her reactions. He was determined to get the words exactly right, to capture everything he felt in a way that would leave no doubt about his commitment. I want everyone there to understand that this is not a whim or a rebellion or some kind of political statement, he explained one evening. I want them to see that I love you completely, that you are my partner and my best friend and the person I want to spend the rest of my life with. I think they will understand that just from the fact that you are marrying me, Grazza said dryly. Maybe, but I want to be sure. I want the words to matter. She kissed him softly. They will matter because they come from you. That is all that counts. The day of the wedding arrived with unseasonably warm weather and clear skies, as if the universe was offering its blessing. Their guests arrived throughout the morning, setting up camps around the homestead and transforming the property into a temporary village. Grazza spent the morning getting ready with Ruth's help, wearing a dress that had been specially made for the occasion. It was simple but beautiful, dyed a deep forest green that complemented her skin tone and cut in a style that accommodated her muscular build. "You look stunning," Ruth said as she helped Grazza arrange her hair. "Kellan is going to lose his mind when he sees you." Grazza studied herself in the small mirror, seeing not the scars that had defined her for so long but the woman she had become: strong, determined, loved. "I still cannot quite believe this is happening," she admitted. "Believe it. You deserve this, Grazza. You both do." The ceremony itself was brief, but profound. The elder who officiated, a wise-faced woman with gray hair and gentle eyes, spoke about love as an act of courage, about the bravery required to choose connection over isolation, about the strength it took to build a life together in the face of opposition. Then it was time for the vows. Kellan went first, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his expression. "Grazza, a year ago I was alone, convinced that was how my life would always be. Then you walked into that clearing and everything changed. You showed me what true strength looks like. You taught me that love is not about appearances or bloodlines or what other people think. It is about finding someone who makes you better, who challenges you and supports you and refuses to let you settle for less than you deserve. You are that person for me. You are my partner, my best friend, and my future. I promise to stand by you through whatever comes. I promise to defend you, to honor you, and to love you for the rest of my days. I am yours, completely and forever." Grazza felt tears streaming down her face, both sides, scarred and whole, as she struggled to compose herself enough to speak. When she finally found her voice, the words came from somewhere deep inside, from the part of her that had been damaged but never broken. "Kellan, you saved my life. Not by pulling me from danger or defeating an enemy, but by seeing me when I had become invisible even to myself. You looked at my scars and saw strength rather than weakness. You offered me not just love but partnership, not just acceptance but genuine respect. You made me believe that I was worth something again. I promise to honor that gift for the rest of my life. I promise to stand beside you, to work with you, to face whatever challenges come with courage and determination. I promise to love you through hard times and good, through prejudice and acceptance, through everything life throws at us. I am yours, now and always." The elder smiled and declared them married, and Kellan pulled Grazza into a kiss that was witnessed by 30 cheering guests who understood exactly what this union meant. The celebration that followed was the kind of joyous chaos that makes for the best memories. There was food and drink and music, dancing and stories and laughter that echoed through the forest. For one day in that small clearing, their community created a space where love mattered more than prejudice, where hope was stronger than fear. Grazza danced with Kellan under the stars, her husband now, and felt a completeness she had never thought possible. She was not healed, the scars would never disappear, and the memories of rejection and pain would always be part of her. But she was whole in a way that had nothing to do with her appearance and everything to do with the love she had found and the life she had built. As the night wore on and the guests began to drift toward their camps, Kellan pulled Grazza aside for a quiet moment alone. "Happy?" he asked, his arms around her waist, terrified, overwhelmed. "Happier than I have ever been in my life." He laughed and kissed her forehead. "Good, That is how I feel too." They stood together in the darkness, listening to the distant sounds of celebration. And Grazza thought about the ritual that had scarred her, about the fire that had changed everything. She had spent so long thinking of that night as the end of her life, as the moment when everything good was burned away. But maybe it had not been an ending at all. Maybe it had been a beginning brutal and painful and unfair, but a beginning nonetheless. Maybe she had needed to be broken down so completely in order to discover what she was really made of. Maybe the scars had been not a curse, but a test, a challenge that had prepared her for the even greater challenge of learning to hope again. Or maybe that was all retrospective rationalization, a way of making sense of senseless trauma. Maybe the ritual had just been a horrible accident, and what mattered was not the scarring but what she had chosen to do afterward. Either way, she was here now, married to a man who loved her, surrounded by a community that supported them, building a life that mattered. The road ahead would not be easy. Theodore and people like him would continue to spread their hatred. There would be more harassment, more challenges, more moments when they would have to choose courage over safety. But they would face it together, and that made all the difference. "I love you," Grazza said, the words coming easily now, no longer weighted with fear and disbelief. "I love you too," Kellan replied. "My wife." She smiled at that wife, a title she had never thought to claim, and pulled him into another kiss. Behind them, the celebration continued. Around them, the forest stood witness. Above them, the stars wheeled through their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small dramas of mortal hearts but beautiful nonetheless. And in that moment, Grazza knew with absolute certainty that she had found what she had been searching for since the night of the ritual, since the moment she walked away from her clan, since the first time she wondered if anyone would ever look at her with anything other than horror or pity. She had found home, not a place but a person, not acceptance from the world but acceptance from someone whose opinion actually mattered, not an end to hardship but a partner to face hardship with. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The wedding night eventually gave way to the wedding morning, and their guests began the process of packing up and heading back to their respective homesteads. There were hugs and promises to visit, offers of future support and genuine expressions of happiness for the newlyweds. Ruth was the last to leave, after helping clean up and making sure Grazza and Kellan had everything they needed. "You two did good," she said as she mounted her horse. "You stood up and showed everyone that love is worth fighting for. That matters more than you know." "Thank you for everything," Grazza said, meaning it more than she could express. "You made this possible. You made it possible by having the courage to love each other. I just helped with the logistics." Ruth smiled. "I will be back in a few weeks to check on you. And if you need anything before then, send word." After she rode away, Grazza and Kellan stood together in the now quiet clearing, surveying the remnants of the celebration. "Well," Kellan said after a moment, "we did it. We did." "What now?" Grazza considered the question seriously. What now indeed? They had made their declaration, held their celebration, publicly committed to each other in the face of opposition and prejudice. The grand gesture was complete, but life was not made of grand gestures. It was made of small, daily choices: what to plant in the spring, how to preserve food for winter, whose turn it was to clean the barn. It was made of quiet evenings by the fire and early mornings in the cold. It was made of work and laughter and the occasional argument over something trivial. It was made, in other words, of exactly the kind of life she and Kellan had already been building together. "Now we live," Grazza said simply. "We work the land, we support our community, we face whatever challenges come. We just do it as a married couple instead of as partners." Kellan grinned. So basically the same as before, but with better legal standing, more or less. I can live with that. They spent the rest of the day in comfortable domesticity, cleaning up from the wedding and returning the homestead to its normal state. It felt good, Grazza thought, to have something familiar to do after all the excitement and emotion. It grounded her, reminded her that their life together was built on a foundation of practical partnership as much as romantic love. Over the following weeks and months, they settled into a rhythm that felt both new and comfortably familiar. The marriage had not changed the fundamentals of their relationship. They still worked side by side, still talked for hours by the fire, still found comfort and joy in each other's company. But there was a deepened sense of commitment now, a security that came from having made public promises and legal commitments. And slowly, gradually, they noticed a shift in how other people responded to them. Not everyone, certainly. Theodore and his cronies remained hostile, and there were plenty of people in the settlement who would never accept a human-orc marriage. But there were also people who seemed curious rather than hostile, who asked careful questions about how they had met and how they made their relationship work. There were younger couples in mixed relationships who reached out for advice, emboldened by Grazza and Kellan's example. The community they had started to build grew stronger and more interconnected. They established regular gatherings where mixed couples and their supporters could meet, share resources, and offer mutual support. It was not large enough to be a true social movement, but it was beginning a network of people choosing love over prejudice, connection over isolation. Winter came and went, then spring returned with its endless work of planting and renewal. Grazza and Kellan celebrated their first anniversary with a quiet dinner, and the exchange of small gifts: a new knife for her, a book of poetry for him. "I never thought I would have this," Grazza said that evening as they sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over fields just beginning to show green shoots. "A home, a partner, a future worth looking forward to." "I did not either," Kellan admitted. "I thought I would spend my life alone, working this land until I was too old to manage it anymore. Then you walked into that clearing and turned everything upside down." "Is that a complaint?" "Hell no. Best thing that ever happened to me." Grazza leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "Do you ever regret it? The harassment, the isolation from your community, all the difficulty?" Kellan was quiet for a moment, genuinely considering the question. "No," he said finally. "Not even once. Yeah, some things are harder than they would be if I had married a human woman and settled into a conventional life. But everything that matters, everything that makes me truly happy comes from choosing you. So no, I do not regret it. Not for a second." "Good," Grazza said, satisfied. "Because you are stuck with me now. Best trap I ever walked into." They sat in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to emerge overhead. Grazza thought about the ritual fire that had scarred her, about the long, lonely years in the cave, about the deer that had led her into that fateful clearing. She thought about all the pain and rejection and fear she had endured, all the times she had wanted to give up, all the moments when it seemed like happiness was something other people got to have but not her. And she thought about everything that had come after the partnership that had grown into friendship that had deepened into love, the community they had found and helped build, the life they were creating together, day by day, choice by choice. The scars were still there. They would always be there, a permanent reminder of the worst night of her life. But they no longer defined her. They were simply part of her story, no more and no less significant than any of the other experiences that had shaped her into who she was. And who she was, it turned out, was someone worthy of love, someone capable of building a life worth living. Someone who had faced the worst and come out the other side stronger. Someone who had found home in the most unexpected of places, in the arms of a human farmer who had looked at her scars and seen beauty, who had heard her story and offered partnership, who had chosen her again and again despite every reason not to. "Thank you," Grazza said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me, for loving me, for choosing me." Kellan turned to face her, his gray eyes reflecting starlight. "Thank you for letting me, for taking a chance on a random human who offered to share a deer, for staying when you could have left, for loving me back." They kissed then, soft and sweet, and Grazza felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. This was where she belonged. This was what she had been searching for without knowing it. This was home, not perfect, not without challenges or difficulties or the occasional terrible day, but real and solid and worth every struggle it had taken to get here. The ritual had scarred half her face, had left her thinking no one would ever look at her again with anything other than horror or pity. But she had been wrong. Kellan looked at her every day with love and desire and deep respect. Their community looked at her with acceptance and support. And most importantly, she had learned to look at herself with compassion, to see her own strength and value independent of what anyone else thought. The scars remained, but they had lost their power to define her, to limit her, to dictate what kind of life she was allowed to live. She had survived the fire. She had survived the aftermath, and she had built something beautiful from the ashes. That, Grazza thought as she sat beside her husband under the stars, was worth celebrating. Not just today, but every single day for the rest of her life. The story could have ended there, with that peaceful moment of reflection and contentment. But life does not work in neat narrative arcs. It continues, messily and unpredictably, bringing new challenges and joys in equal measure. The next challenge came in the form of an unexpected visitor one morning in late spring. Grazza was working in the garden when she heard the sound of someone approaching. She looked up to see an orc woman standing at the edge of the property, clearly uncertain whether to come closer. The woman was young, perhaps 19 or 20, with the unmarked green skin and small tusks typical of their kind. She carried a pack over one shoulder and had the wary, exhausted look of someone who had been traveling hard for days. Grazza stood slowly, not wanting to startle the visitor. "Can I help you?" The young orc seemed to steel herself. "Are you Grazza, the one who married the human farmer?" "I am." "I heard about you, about what you did, getting married publicly and building a life here." She took a hesitant step forward. "I am Nezka. I need help." Kellan emerged from the barn, alerted by the sound of voices. He took in the situation quickly and approached carefully, making no sudden movements. "What kind of help?" Grazza asked. Nezka's story came out in a rush. She had fallen in love with a human man from a nearby settlement. They wanted to be together, but both their communities had reacted with violence and threats. The man had been beaten and told to stay away from orcs or face worse. Nezka had been cast out of her clan with the warning that if she returned, she would be killed. "We did not know what to do," Nezka said, her voice breaking. "Then I heard rumors about you and your husband, about how you stood up to both your peoples and made it work. I thought maybe you could help us. Tell us how you did it." Grazza and Kellan exchanged glances. Then Grazza said, "Where is your partner now?" "Hiding in the forest about 5 miles from here. I did not want to bring him until I knew it was safe." "Go get him," Kellan said. "Bring him here. We can talk, figure out a plan." "Really?" Nezka looked like she might cry from relief. "Really," Grazza confirmed. "We have been where you are. We know how hard this is. We will help however we can." After Nezka left to retrieve her partner, Kellan turned to Grazza. "We are doing this, taking them in." Did you see her face? She was desperate. And you know what it is like to be in that position, not knowing if there is any hope. I do. But Grazza, if we start taking in other mixed couples, this homestead could become a target, a symbol of everything the hardliners hate. Grazza considered this soberly. He was right. Harboring other couples would increase their visibility and their risk. But she also remembered the lonely years in her cave, the certainty that she would face the world alone forever. If they could prevent even one person from experiencing that kind of isolation and despair, was not that worth the risk? It might become a target, she acknowledged. But it might also become a refuge, a place where people like us can find support and community. Is not that worth fighting for? Kellan was quiet for a long moment, then broke into a smile. When did you become the idealistic one? I thought that was my job. I learned it from you. Fair enough. All right, we help them, and anyone else who comes looking for it. Nezka returned that afternoon with her partner, a shy human man named Kurt, who had clearly been on the receiving end of significant violence. His face was a mass of bruises, and he moved with the careful stiffness of someone nursing broken ribs. Over the next several days, Grazza and Kellan helped them figure out a plan. Nezka and Kurt could not return to either of their home communities, so they needed to establish themselves somewhere new. Kellan helped Kurt connect with contacts who might have work available. Grazza taught Nezka wilderness survival skills that would serve her well in the borderlands. And both of them offered the kind of emotional support and practical advice that could only come from people who had walked the same difficult path. By the time Nezka and Kurt left a week later, they had a destination in mind and a network of contacts to help them get established. More importantly, they had hoped the knowledge that they were not alone, that others had faced these challenges and survived. Thank you, Nezka said before they departed. You gave us more than advice. You gave us proof that this is possible. After they left, Grazza and Kellan looked at each other with the dawning realization of what they had just started. We are going to have more people showing up, are not we? Kellan said, probably. This homestead is going to become known as a place where mixed couples can find help, most likely. Kellan considered this, then shrugged. Well, I suppose we better figure out how to build a proper guest house then. That small room is not going to cut it if we are regularly hosting refugees. And so they did. Over the next year, with help from Ruth and others in their community, they expanded the homestead to include better facilities for guests. Word spread through the borderlands about Grazza and Kellan's place, not advertised openly, but known to those who needed to know. A refuge for mixed couples and their supporters. A place where love was valued more than bloodlines. They did not take in everyone who asked. Some people they referred to other safe havens in the network. Some they helped with supplies and advice, but did not house. But they helped where they could, using their own experiences to guide others through the difficult process of building lives that defied societal expectations. It was not easy. There were setbacks and dangers. Theodore and his faction made several attempts to cause serious trouble, including one incident where they tried to burn down the barn. But Grazza and Kellan had prepared for such possibilities, and with the help of their community, they repelled the attack and reported it to the regional authorities. Slowly, painfully, the legal and social landscape began to shift. It would be years, maybe generations, before mixed relationships were truly accepted in the borderlands. But Grazza and Kellan were part of the vanguard, the ones who stood up first and loudest, who refused to hide or apologize for their love. And through it all, their relationship remained the center of everything. On the hardest days, when the harassment seemed relentless and the progress impossibly slow, they had each other. They had the quiet evenings by the fire, the shared laughter over dinner, the comfort of falling asleep in each other's arms. They had, in other words, exactly what they had promised each other on their wedding day: partnership, love, and the courage to face whatever came together. 2 years after their wedding, Grazza woke one morning with the strange certainty that something significant was about to happen. It was not a premonition exactly, more like a feeling in the air, a sense of potential waiting to unfold. She found Kellan already up, standing on the porch and watching the sunrise with an unusual stillness. "What is it?" she asked, moving to stand beside him. "I have been thinking," he said slowly, "about everything we have built here. The homestead, the community, the refuge we have created for others. It is good work, important work. But it is not enough. We are helping people one at a time, giving them a place to hide and regroup. What if we could do more? What if we could actually change things on a larger scale?" Grazza thought about this. "What did you have in mind?" "I am not entirely sure yet. But Ruth was telling me about a movement in the eastern provinces, people working to change the laws around mixed marriages and interspecies rights. I keep thinking we should be part of that somehow. Not leave here, this place will always be important, but maybe use our story, our experience, to push for real systemic change." It was an ambitious idea, maybe even a dangerous one. Speaking out publicly, becoming the face of a political movement, would bring them a level of scrutiny and risk they had so far avoided. But Grazza could see the logic in it. They had proven that human-orc relationships could work, that love could transcend the boundaries of species and culture. "Why not share that proof with the wider world? It will make us targets," she said, because it needed to be acknowledged. We are already targets. "It will consume a lot of our time and energy." "True. But we have been building infrastructure here. We have people we can trust to help maintain the homestead and continue the refuge work. We do not have to do everything ourselves." Grazza looked at her husband, seeing the determination and hope in his eyes, and felt her own resolve solidify. "All right, let us do it. Let us tell our story to whoever will listen. Let us fight for something bigger than just our own happiness." Kellan pulled her into a tight embrace. Together, always together. And so they embarked on a new phase of their journey, becoming advocates and activists for interspecies rights. They traveled to nearby settlements, telling their story and dispelling myths about orc-human relationships. They worked with other mixed couples to document their experiences and present them to regional authorities. They wrote letters, gave speeches, and slowly built a coalition of support. It was exhausting, frustrating work. Progress was glacial and setbacks were frequent, but they were not alone. Ruth and the others in their network supported them, as did a growing number of younger people who had grown up seeing mixed couples and did not understand why such relationships should be forbidden. 3 years after their wedding, Grazza and Kellan attended a regional council meeting where new laws regarding interspecies rights were being debated. They sat in the audience, holding hands, as lawmakers argued about whether orc-human marriages should be legally recognized. The debate was heated, with passionate arguments on both sides. But when the vote finally came, the measure passed by a narrow margin. It was a small victory. It only applied to their specific region, and enforcement would be inconsistent at best. But it was recognition, official and legal, that relationships like theirs had value and deserved protection. Grazza felt tears streaming down her face as the vote was announced. Beside her, Kellan squeezed her hand so tightly it was almost painful. "We did it," he whispered. "We actually did it." "We started it," Grazza corrected. "This is just the beginning." And it was. The work continued, the fight went on, and there would be many more battles ahead. But for that moment, in that crowded council chamber, Grazza allowed herself to feel pure, uncomplicated joy. The ritual had scarred half her face. The disfigured orc woman had thought no one would ever look at her again with anything but horror or pity, but she had been wrong in ways she could never have imagined. People looked at her now and saw an advocate, a pioneer, a woman who had taken her pain and transformed it into purpose. They saw someone who had fought for love and won, who had refused to accept the limitations society tried to impose. And when Kellan looked at her, which he did constantly, his eyes full of warmth and admiration and deep, abiding love, she knew beyond any doubt that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The story of Grazza and Kellan became the kind of tale that gets told and retold, embellished and altered with each telling. Some versions emphasize the romance, painting them as star-crossed lovers defying fate. Others focused on their activism, making them symbols of social progress. A few portrayed them as controversial figures whose relationship had divided communities and sparked ongoing debate. But the truth, as Grazza and Kellan knew it, was both simpler and more complex than any of the stories suggested. They were just two people who had found each other in unlikely circumstances and chosen to build a life together despite every obstacle in their path. Everything else, the refuge, the activism, the legal victories, had grown organically from that initial choice to love each other and refuse to apologize for it. Years passed. The homestead thrived. Their community grew. The laws continued to evolve, slowly but surely moving toward greater acceptance of interspecies relationships. Grazza never lost the scars, never stopped having moments when she looked in the mirror and saw the ruin that the ritual fire had left behind. But those moments became less frequent, less painful as she accumulated other experiences to define herself by. She was not just the scarred orc woman. She was Kellan's wife, a skilled hunter, a community leader, an advocate for change, a friend to dozens, a symbol of hope to hundreds. The scars were part of her story, but they were not the whole story. And that made all the difference. On the 5-year anniversary of their wedding, Grazza and Kellan hosted another gathering at the homestead. It was similar to their wedding celebration in many ways, the same clearing, many of the same people, the same sense of community and mutual support. But this time, the gathering included a much larger and more diverse group. There were humans and orcs, mixed couples and their children, activists and allies from across the region. As the sun set and the celebration moved into full swing, Grazza stood at the edge of the clearing with Kellan, watching everyone mingle and laugh and share food and stories. "Look at this," Kellan said, his voice full of wonder. "Look at what we helped create." Grazza surveyed the scene, the orc children playing with human children, the mixed couples holding hands without fear, the easy mingling of peoples who were supposed to be enemies. It was not perfect. There was still prejudice, still hatred, still communities where people like them faced violence and rejection. But here, in this moment, in this space, love had won. "We did good," she agreed. "We did. And we are going to keep doing good, for as long as we have breath in our bodies." Agreed. She turned to face him fully, taking both his hands in hers. "I love you, Kellan Jorvik. I love the life we have built. I love the man you are and the future we are creating together. I love you too, Grazza Jorvik." He said her married name with obvious pride, and she felt her heart swell with emotion. "I love everything about you, everything about us, everything about this crazy, beautiful, impossible life we have made." They kissed then, long and deep, heedless of the celebration happening around them. When they finally broke apart, both smiling, they turned back to watch their community, their family, celebrating under the stars. The ritual had scarred half her face. The disfigured orc woman had thought no one would ever look at her again, but she had been spectacularly, wonderfully wrong. People looked at her every day with love, with respect, with hope. Her husband looked at her and saw beauty and strength. Her community looked at her and saw leadership and courage. Strangers who heard her story looked at her and saw proof that change was possible, that love could transcend boundaries, that the world could be better than it was. The scars remained. They would always remain. But they had lost their power to define her, to limit her, to dictate the shape of her life. She was Grazza, wife and partner, hunter and activist, survivor and thriver. She was scarred and whole, wounded and healed, broken and incredibly, beautifully strong. And she was loved deeply, completely, without reservation or qualification. In the end, that was all that mattered. The celebration continued late into the night, with music and dancing and the kind of joy that comes from genuine community and shared purpose. Grazza and Kellan moved through the crowd, talking with friends old and new, checking on guests, and basking in the warmth of collective happiness. Later, when most of the guests had retired to their tents and the fire had burned down to embers, Grazza and Kellan walked together through the quiet homestead. They paused by the barn where they had worked side by side through countless seasons. They stood by the garden that fed them and their guests. They looked out over the fields that represented years of shared labor and mutual support. "This is home," Grazza said, the words carrying a weight of meaning that went beyond simple geography. "This is where I belong." "We belong," Kellan corrected gently. "This is where we belong together." She leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, and knew with absolute certainty that it was true. They belonged here, in this place they had built with their own hands and hearts. They belonged with their community, with the people who had supported them and been supported in turn. They belonged to each other, bound by promises and shared dreams and the kind of love that endures. The ritual fire had tried to destroy her. It had left her scarred and broken, convinced she would spend her life alone, but it had not succeeded. She had survived. She had healed. She had found love in the most unexpected of places and built a life that mattered. The scars were a part of her story, but they were not the end of it. This homestead, this community, this love, this life was the end of it. Or rather, it was the beginning of a new story entirely. One that she and Kellan would write together, day by day, choice by choice, for all the years to come. And it was, Grazza thought as she stood in the quiet night with her husband's arms around her, a very good story indeed, the best story, her story, their story. A story that was still being written, with chapters yet to come that would bring new challenges and new joys, new struggles and new victories. But whatever those chapters held, Grazza knew they would face them together. And that made even the uncertain future feel like something worth embracing. She tilted her face up to kiss Kellan one more time, soft and sweet and full of promise. Then, hand in hand, they walked back to their home, their real, true home, and closed the door on the night. The ritual had scarred her, but love had healed her, and that was the only ending that mattered.